Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How's it going? Welcome to another instructional and educational video on the Victory Loves Preparation Network. As always, I am your instructor, Holland. I hope all of you have been doing well, especially since the craziness of Afghanistan and everything has been happening with the refugees coming over here and such. I know a lot of you are worried and stressed out, but that's what I'm here for. And today we'll be talking about a topic that is talked about quite often and instructed on quite often, but in my personal opinion, it's one that is extremely relevant for what's happening in today's world. Basic firearms information and techniques. Well, why is this such an important class? Well, I think because of all the craziness that has happened with not just COVID, but everything else in the world. There are a lot of people nowadays who before were not thinking about purchasing a firearm, nowadays are thinking about purchasing firearms and ammunition quite readily. I mean, think about it. When the COVID pandemic hit, almost everybody went out. It was crazy how many guns and how much ammo were being bought up. Even nowadays, it's still difficult to find ammo. The reason I'm making this class today is not because it was heavily requested. It actually wasn't heavily requested. The reason I'm making it, though, is twofold. One, I like to dispel a lot of untruths about firearms for people that are thinking about buying them to make them more comfortable. And two, because individuals who have bought firearms but have absolutely no idea how to use them, the proper function and everything like that of firearms, don't know how to train with them either, have asked multiple times, not just me, but I've seen people who don't know how to use firearms try and train with them and they have no idea what they're doing. It's cringy for me to watch, it's cringy for other people who know what they're doing to watch, but it's also important because if you're going to be a firearm owner, not only should you know how to properly handle and safely handle your firearms, but you should also be able to properly maneuver them in a combative situation as well. One of the things that I see and I hear often that really irk me, and I'm sure irks a lot of other people who train firearms regularly, are individuals who go out, purchase a firearm, and just by having one think that they are prepared to handle whatever situation they're presented with. That's the equivalent of someone going out, buying a Dodge Hellcat, and then going to a professional race truck with professional race car drivers and going, yeah, I'm pretty sure that I can beat you around this circuit. Yes, you may have the technology, you may have the proper tool, but in the end, you have absolutely no idea what you're doing or how to use it, and the person that's more experienced is going to be able to defeat you every single time. So today's class will be broken down into two separate different parts. The first section will be here with me in the classroom where we're going to talk about a whole bunch of different stuff, things like weapon safety rules, nomenclature, all those different types of things that are extremely important for fundamentals for firearms. And then afterwards, you're going to join me at the range where we're going to go over some very basic shooting drills, things like how to draw from the holster, how to draw and fire, trigger control, breath control, different types of shooting drills like a double tap or a failure to stop or a controlled pair. And I hope at the end of this class, you will have the very basic understanding of how to drill and train with your firearm, as well as what to buy and just the basic knowledge. That's all this class is going to cover today, is the basic knowledge. If you're already a firearm owner and you know what you're doing with your firearm, then maybe this class isn't for you, because I'm directing this more towards the individuals who are brand new gun owners or are thinking about buying a firearm but don't know what they're doing with it. If there are other classes that you would like me to cover in the future with advanced tactics and stuff like that, I'd be more than happy to do that. But for today, I'm focusing on the white belts, the people that have first come in and don't really know what they're doing. And I understand it can be scary and can be kind of strange when you first purchase a firearm, you don't know what you're doing with it, and you want someone to help you with that. That's what this class is about. So with that being said, no more talking. Let's get into class because we do have a lot to cover today. If you guys are ready, I'm ready. Let class begin. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so let's go over one of the very few first things that we're going to talk about here. And that is, what type of gun should you buy if you're looking for something for home defense or personal defense? If you're watching this video, then I'm going to just assume that you're buying a gun or you're purchasing a firearm because you want a firearm for self-protection. It makes total sense, and it's actually a very wise idea. You want to be able to use the tools that you could possibly be met with. If people walked around with nothing but swords, I'm willing to bet that you would want to have a sword on your hip just in case somebody decided to use their sword on you. But if you're first purchasing a firearm and you've never bought a gun before, it can be a lot like going over to a car dealership when you've never bought a car before and having no idea what you're looking for. So let's go over some things. I'm going to gear today specifically towards pistols and handguns. If you would like something later on that focuses on shotguns or rifles, I have those as well, and I have certain things to talk about with those things as well. But the fundamentals are all going to relatively be the same when it comes to pistols and other weapons for buying things for self-defense. The weapon should be compact. This is generally why handguns are preferred for home defense, because they are a very small package. The reason you want them compact is because in a CQB or close quarter battle situation, if you have a big long gun and you're trying to clear very tight corners, the weapon can move through a threshold of the wall or a doorway and someone can grab onto it, and next thing you know, you have a struggle. Obviously, it also makes the weapon much easier to conceal if you're going to carry a weapon every day as a concealed carry permit holder for self-defense. So because of that, you want something small. Ideally, right now, we're talking about a handgun. Next is stopping power. Obviously, when you shoot somebody, if you ever have to, God forbid you ever have to, but if you have to, you don't want to have to put an entire magazine into the guy in order to drop him. The widely preferred round is 9mm, but you can get weapons that are in 40 or 45. Me personally, I carry a 9mm, but I also have a Smith & Wesson M&P 40 caliber full size that I have just in case. If you're going to go with a smaller caliber, you don't want to go anything less than what I'd say would be like a 380. I have a Sig Sauer P232, which is chambered in 380. I love that gun. It's a very nice gun. It's very comfortable, and I'm willing to bet that if I shot somebody with it, it would still be effective. The only issue that you have is if you have someone who is one of the 3Ds, drunk, deranged, or on drugs. I've seen videos of individuals who have taken a lot of rounds to the chest and center mass when they're high on something like PCP, and it doesn't affect them until much later. I'll be going over case studies and other videos much later on that are going to show these types of situations. Reliability is going to be the third thing that you want to look for. Obviously, if you have to drive several hundred miles, you want to make sure that your car is going to be able to handle it. It's the same exact thing with your firearm. If you find yourself in a stressful shooting situation and you need to draw your weapon and actually end up shooting somebody, you don't want the technology to fail you at that moment. Technology does fail, and that's why we can't always rely on it, but you want to make sure the technology that you're using has a lesser chance of failing than something else. There are plenty of brands out there that have much better reliability. Glock is probably the reigning supreme reliability candidate for pistols and firearms, but there are other models that are almost just as good, and we'll go over those in a little bit. Fourth thing we have to look at is price. Now, it is true that you can get firearms for as low as $200. High Point firearms are an example of that. But obviously, just like with anything else, it's you get what you pay for. In my personal opinion, I'm willing to spend a lot less money on things that aren't as important to my safety and my health, like clothes, like the clothes I wear every day out in normal society. Things like my couch, things like my blankets. You can go and you can get really cheap versions of those things at Walmart or whatever, save yourself some money, and they'll still work just fine, but not with firearms. Once again, you may very well have to rely on this thing to save your life or somebody you care about's lives, and so you don't want to be cheap on it. You want to make sure that the weapon that you bought is something that is well worth it. You spend more money, you're going to get a better product. That's just the way it is with really anything. Next thing we have to talk about and consider are the features of the firearm you're purchasing. Some guns are bare bones, whereas others come with a whole bunch of really nifty things. It's just like purchasing a car. You can go and you can buy the standard package, which has everything you need and nothing that you don't, or you can spend a bit more money and go get the thing that's going to make your life a whole lot easier and much more comfortable. Some firearms come with multiple different types of safeties. We'll get into safeties later on. They come with Trijicon sights and a whole bunch of really nifty things. But in the end, all you got to make sure you have is a firearm that's going to shoot straight and be safe. Just keep in mind that if you do end up going for a firearm with more bells and whistles on it, you're going to end up having to pay more. And the last two things that we have to take a look at before purchasing a firearm or when we're looking to purchase a firearm are the ergonomics and the legalities. All the ergonomics means is whether the gun feels good in your hand. Is the gun comfortable? Does your hand fit around it? Is it too large for you to handle? A female who weighs 100 pounds is not going to be able to fire the same caliber or type of weapon that a 185-pound male is going to be able to shoot. So you have to know yourself and what you are capable of doing and what you're capable of handling. And then obviously the legalities being some states don't allow certain firearms. I know when I was working and I was living in California, they had an entire list of guns that you were not allowed to have and an entire list of guns that you were allowed to have. And before you went out and you purchased a firearm, or before you had a firearm transferred from another state to you, you had to go on that list and you had to make sure that the firearm that you were getting was on the list of legal firearms. If it wasn't and you got caught with it, you were in big trouble. Magazine size also varies depending on the state. I know high capacity magazines are banned in California, Connecticut, and in other states. That means if your firearm has a magazine capacity that goes over 10 rounds, you're not going to be able to purchase that magazine or that firearm legally. I know for California, when I was working there, certain AR platforms and certain other weapons were not even allowed to have a detachable magazine. You had to load it manually through this weird thing. It was very annoying. Pistol grips also weren't allowed. So the biggest thing you need to look at is what your state allows. Look at the gun laws of your state, do some research, and then figure out what you're not allowed to have. I know the criminals aren't worrying about that, but being a law-abiding citizen, you need to do your homework. So in summation, let's go over all of those things one last time. We want something that's compact. We want something that has decent stopping power. We want something that's reliable. We want something that has decent features. We want something that is ergonomically sound. And we want something that is legal in our state. Obviously, we want to find a gun that has all of those things, and that's where the difficult part lies. So I'm going to show you some of the firearms that I've purchased that in my personal opinion meet those things, and then we'll go from there. Okay guys, we're back at the black table again, all right. So right now I'm gonna go over the firearms that I personally own. These are all handguns, by the way. We're not gonna go over my rifles or my shotguns or anything like that, because once again, we're sticking to firearms in handgun form for self-defense. Keep in mind that these are just my recommendations, and these are just the firearms that I have accrued over my many years of firearm experience and ownership. I'm not endorsed by any product, and I'm not telling you what to buy. Do your own research, figure out what's best for you, and then go from there. But these three guns that I'm going to show to you right now are all my personal favorites. I'd also like to mention that these firearms have all been unloaded and they are safe. I did my safety procedures and my weapons clearing off camera. We always treat every firearm as if it's loaded, and these weapons will be pointed in a safe direction, but just understand that these weapons are safe. Let's start with the cheapest and work our way up. So the very first gun that I'm going to show you guys is the Smith & Wesson M&P. This particular model is the full-sized 40 caliber version. Just because this is an instructional video for beginners, this is what a 40 caliber round looks like. So we're going to put it right there. And as we go down in calibers, we're going to compare them. I like the M&P because it is robust. I made sure that I looked up the stress tests they did on it beforehand. They were freezing this thing in water and then thawing it out and then taking it out, and it was firing just fine. They were burying it underneath sand. It was firing just fine. And I really like that because you want to make sure that your firearm is not going to be rendered inoperative because of certain weather conditions and stuff like that. The sights on it are relatively simple. You guys can see right here that it's just basic white dot sights and everything. It's nothing special, but at the price tag, you can't really go wrong. This weapon retails for between $350 and $400. I think I got mine for $350. This is the first handgun I bought, so it was a long time ago, but I'm fairly certain that's how much I got it for. It does have a Picatinny rail right here, so that way you can mount, you know, your flashlights, lasers, whatever else you desire to put on it. It comes with 2 spare magazines, and there are many holsters available on the market that you can buy. The ergonomics of it are very, very good. I like how it feels in my hand. It has kind of a higher tang up here, so I can fit my hand very, very high up on it, and I can curl my fingers around it. It feels very, very tight and very good. And because it's a full size, it has a little bit more weight than a compact. If you were to get the bodyguard or the shield version of these weapons, or the compact version of these weapons, I would not recommend going for the 40 caliber round. I recommend going something small like a 9mm, because I fired the 40 caliber version of this handgun when it was in the compact version, and it was just way too much kick for it to handle. It was very uncomfortable. It kind of slid around in my hand, and I had to adjust my hand every time I wanted to fire a few more rounds. But with this, no issues whatsoever. Okay guys, so let's move on to the second firearm in my arsenal. My second pick for today is going to be the H&K VP9. Now the VP9, you can kind of think of it like a dressed up version of a Glock. They're both German made weapons, and we all know that German engineering is excellent, so in terms of reliability, this is some of the best that you can get. One thing I very much like about this firearm is just how comfortable it fits in the hand. I like the molding down here for fingers, so that when you put your hand on it and you wrap your fingers around, it really does fit into the hand. You get a lot of good control with it. I also like the sights that come standard on it. While they aren't like Trijicon sights or anything like that, they are brighter than your standard white dot sights that you find on like the Smith & Wesson and stuff like that. Now this is a VP9. It does not come in any other caliber but 9mm, and that's why it's called a VP9. And for everyone wondering, this is a 9mm round. So if we put it down here and we compare it to, let's say, a 40 caliber that we had for our Smith & Wesson, you guys can kind of tell that the 40 caliber is a little bit heftier, has a little bit more firepower to it. Now, does that mean that the VP9 is less effective? Of course not. 9mm is not less effective than a 40 caliber. It just means that 40 caliber has a little bit more punch to it. 9mm is still used plenty of times over by law enforcement and military, so there's nothing wrong with the 9mm. The VP9 does come with a Picatinny rail, so you can mount your lasers and stuff like that on it. The magazine release here and stuff like that is a little bit strange. It's this kind of lever thing that comes down. It's a little bit different than my Smith & Wesson and all the other guns that I've trained with before that has a push button magazine release. So it just takes some getting used to, but ultimately it's not that hard to make the transition. Really, the only downside that I can find for this gun is that the price tag. Now, because this is a dressed up Glock, you're going to pay more for it. Think about, you know, you're paying like a Lexus versus a Toyota. If I remember correctly, I bought this gun for about $900. I know that's a hefty price tag for some people, but honestly, you're going for the cream of the crop when it comes to weapons like this. And as always, you get what you pay for. Okay guys, let's move on to the third and final handgun we're going to examine today. And the third one's kind of a weird one, to be honest with you. It's not something that's usually shown in a lot of gun shops. It's not shown in like your top 5 best concealed carry handguns ever type of video. It's a little bit unorthodox, but in my opinion, it's one of the better ones for me. And I'm going to explain why. So this is the Sig Sauer P232. Now the P232, I've seen it described as like the gentleman's concealed carry gun. It does look like something that James Bond would carry, like, you know, a Walter PPK or something like that. But once again, Sig Sauer, German engineering, you can't really go wrong with that. I know it's kind of a weird choice, but let me explain a little bit why I really like this gun. First and foremost is the fact that it's so compact and it's so small. Back when I was motorcycle riding in Connecticut, I used to take this Firearm, put it on my hip with a leather holster, throw a t-shirt over it, and no one would ever know that I had it. It fit right on my body just fine. It was super comfortable, and I never had to adjust it or anything like that. It never got uncomfortable. It was just a very comfortable gun to carry. The next thing is this molded grip right here. Not only was it a comfortable gun to carry, but oh my gosh, it is so comfortable to hold. It wraps in my hand so perfectly, and honestly, it's more comfortable than the VP9 or the M&P that I showed you guys beforehand. I feel so much control and everything like that when I grab onto this gun. I feel like my hand can wrap right around it. The grip here is this rubber material, and honestly it sticks to my hand so much better than the other ones. It's just great. The next thing I really like is it comes standard with these glow-in-the-dark sights. I'm not sure what brand they are, if they're Trijicon or something like that, I doubt it, but in the daytime they absorb the sunlight. At night, when it gets dark, they glow in the dark, so that way if you have to use your weapon in a low light situation, it's very easy for you to get some sight alignment and sight picture. Now the P232 is chambered in .380. This is a .380 round right here. That means that it's going to have less firepower than a 9mm or a 40 caliber, but honestly, .380 isn't the worst I've seen people carry for self-defense. So if we compare the .380 on the left to the 9mm on the right, obviously, you know, the 9mm is going to have some more firepower to it. And then if I compare the 40 caliber to the .380, I mean, look at the difference there. You're going to get much more punch with a 40 caliber than you will with a .380. But as I was saying before, I mean, does it really matter? If you were to pull your firearm out on a guy who's trying to charge you or something like that, and you pull a gun out in self-defense and you empty a 7-round magazine into the guy, is it going to matter so much that it's .380 or it's 9mm? I mean, you're still going to do a lot of damage. Now, there are two things about this gun that I'm not the biggest fan of, and the first is this hammer right here. I'm not the biggest fan of external hammers on firearms because there's a lot of things that can kind of go wrong with them, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And the last thing, probably the biggest thing that I dislike about this firearm is the magazine release. The magazine release is down here. It's this little latch right here. I don't know if you can see that. It's this little latch right here. You pull it back, and that is how you release the magazine. It isn't a spring-loaded magazine release either, so the problem with that is that you actually have to push this down and then physically take the magazine out, because if you were to push this down and hold the gun up, gravity is not going to be able to pull the magazine out by itself. You're going to actually have to physically take the magazine and throw it out and then load your new one, and it's honestly just kind of strange if you're used to push-button magazine drops. It's going to take some drilling and some practice to get used to this gun. Magazine reloads aren't going to be the smoothest when you first start, and that's one of the biggest problems that I have with it. But again, training with it, you can always get over anything when it comes to proper training. So take this firearm out to the range with you, practice with it, and I'm willing to bet that you're going to be able to reload no problem. Now, the price tag for this gun is the other bad thing about it, and that is it's really expensive. Nowadays, you can get them for about $700, but a brand new one is going to run you about the same amount as an H&K, about $900. That's how much I paid for this thing back when I bought it. But I mean, honestly, the quality is so good. I really like it, and I was happy with my purchase. Okay, guys, so those are the 3 firearms that I personally have in my home and on my person, pistol-wise, for self-defense. Keep in mind, obviously, these 3 guns are not the be-all, end-all, and obviously there are other options. Some of the other handguns that are also really good that I've experienced are the Glock 17 and the Springfield XD. I just don't have those guns, so unfortunately, I can't show them to you. But as always, do your own research and figure out what works best for you, for your price tag, and for what you want the firearm for. Another thing I didn't hit on is revolvers. I know that there's a big debate between slide-operated weapons and revolvers, which one's better, which one's more reliable, stuff like that. And honestly, a revolver is not a bad option either, but I don't have a revolver with me right now. I don't own a revolver, so I can't really speak about them. I'm also not the most experienced with revolvers, but I do want to learn more, and I do want to get a revolver because there are good things about them that are better than slide-operated weapons. As a matter of fact, the next pistol I'm thinking about getting is a revolver, but I have to do my research and figure things out before I make my purchase. Okay, so now with this portion of the class over with, let's move on to some other basic knowledge, and then we'll head out to the range. Okay, students, so very briefly I want to touch on some of the essential equipment that we should have if we're going to be proper firearm owners. This is equipment that in my opinion and in the professional firearms owners community's opinion, you should have just so that way you can take care of your gun, A, and B, just some things that you should have on your person while you're carrying your firearm or whether you're out training with it and stuff like that just to make your life easier. It's the same as a car, right? If you have your vehicle, you want to make sure that all the proper maintenance is done on it so that way your car can have a very long service life. You also want to make sure that in your car you have jumper cables, a first aid kit, a small maintenance toolkit if need be in case you need to try and fix things on the fly. The same exact principle relates to firearms. After all, they're both machines. So let's very briefly touch on these things. I'll show them to you and then we'll move on. Okay guys, so first piece of essential equipment you need to have after you purchase your firearm is a proper holster. This holster in this case is a Black Hawk holster. I know there's a whole bunch of different holsters out there. I'm not going to get into the different types or debate about which one's better than the other, but I've always used Black Hawk holsters and in my opinion, they're some of the more comfortable and some of the more ergonomically sound. Your firearm's going to be able to fit right inside just like so. You can carry it on your hip. I like the paddle type holsters and the little push button things. This ensures that someone can't just come up and grab onto it and pull it out. You have to physically push this button down and then pull it out. I know that there's a whole safety issue that a lot of people have, whereas if they put their finger on the holster, their finger can accidentally slip inside the trigger. But as long as you start off drilling slowly with your firearm, I mean, that's never happened to me, and I'm sure it's a very rare occurrence. Either way, just make sure that the holster that you use is going to be comfortable and ergonomically sound for you. Next piece of equipment is a magazine holster. Obviously, for concealed carry permit holders, you want to make sure you have more than one magazine just in case a crazy situation happens. But also at the same time, primarily we use these on the range and stuff like that. If you're doing different types of shooting drills, which we're going to go over in the next video, then this is pretty much, an essential piece of equipment because digging around in your pocket for a spare magazine is time consuming and tactically dangerous. You want to make sure your extra ammunition is available to you immediately, and a good magazine holster is the thing that's going to be able to do that. Once again, this is a Black Hawk brand holster, so it's something that I'd highly recommend. Next, and probably one of the most essential pieces of equipment that you can buy after you have a firearm is a good solid cleaning kit. Now, gun cleaning kits, some are more expensive than the others because they have a lot of different types of things in them. You don't have to buy a super crazy expensive detailed cleaning kit, but I like to have my guns very clean because I want them to be well serviced. So I have bought this by Iunio Cleaning. I think that's how you pronounce it. Iunio. I'm not quite sure, but I got it on Amazon. It wasn't all that expensive. It came with a very nice cleaning mat, one that I can put my guns on without damaging the table or damaging the parts. And if you open it up, as you can see, I mean, it's very comprehensive. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. It comes with a whole bunch of cleaning rags and stuff like that. It comes with bottles to hold your lubrication cleaning solution in. It comes with all these, these long Q-tip type things. It's got attachments for all sorts of, you have the rods up here, the cleaning rods. You can attach all these different brushes and stuff like that on them. It has multiple different types of brushes here, everything from like the very, very soft brushes to the more coarse wire brushes up here to get some really stuck on like carbon and stuff like that that attaches to the internal parts of your gun off. It's just a very, very good basic cleaning kit, and in my opinion, it's one of the best ones, so I think you guys should go for that if you want to. And finally, guys, besides the gun cleaning kit, you want to make sure you have a proper cleaning solution to help clean your firearm. Soap and water is not good for a firearm and stuff like that, so the primary thing that we're going to use is CLP. CLP stands for Clean, Lubricate, Protect. We used to douse our weapons in this in the Marine Corps all the time. You don't want to put too much on because too much liquid inside the gun is going to cause it to malfunction. But this was the stuff that we used all the time in the Marine Corps to clean our firearms. We used to brush it on and wipe it off, and it works very, very well. You can buy this stuff very easily on any sort of firearm website or Walmart or, Amazon obviously is going to have it. Make sure you get a proper solution to clean your firearm. And then obviously there are other things which are, pretty self-explanatory and pretty obvious. Things like hearing protection, eye protection. When you go out to the range, you want to make sure that you have hearing protection to defend your ears. That way you're not going to end up like a lot of veterans nowadays with hearing problems. I have some hearing problems because of the military and everything like that. Not the biggest deal, but if you want to have longevity for your hearing and you don't want to be asking your girlfriend what every 5 seconds like I do, then you want to make sure you have proper hearing protection. Also, proper eye protection. This can come in the form of sunglasses or just regular eye protection glasses. But in case a shell casing comes out, you don't want it to hit and burn your eyeball. Any type of shrapnel coming off of, like if you're shooting steel targets, this happens a lot. So make sure you have some sort of eye protection as well. Another thing to note, guys, is most of the time firearms are going to come in a hard plastic case, and most gun sellers, when you purchase the firearm from them, they're going to give you a complimentary gun lock free of charge. They do this because they want everyone to be able to have firearms safely. If your firearm does not come in a hard plastic case, though, I have seen firearms sold before in like cardboard boxes of all things. If that is the case, then I highly recommend that you go out and you buy a hard plastic case of some kind with a gun lock, so that way your firearm can be stored safely. If you're going to end up going away, you're not going to carry it and you're not going to keep it ready at your bedside. Also, obviously, if you have children, this is a very, very important thing that you need to make sure that you take care of. Part of being a proper firearm owner is making sure that we are only the ones that have access to our guns, not anyone else. If you end up deciding that you like firearms and you kind of catch the bug and you decide to go buy more, or if you decide to end up upgrading and buying some like long guns, like shotguns or rifles of some kind, investing in a gun safe is also a good idea. Gun safes can run a pretty penny. They can get pretty expensive and stuff like that, especially if you have, you know, the really fancy ones. There are some that run on biometrics where you scan your thumbprint. There are some that are electronic where you enter in a code and stuff like that. And now there are also just ones where you have a key. And it doesn't really matter which one you get. Just make sure that the gun safe that you have is going to be sufficient to keep your guns safely locked away. And that's really it. There isn't a whole lot of stuff that you need to have along with a firearm. But these are some of the essentials. So guys, with that being said, let's move on to the next portion of class. Let's move on to some knowledge. Knowledge is the thing that's going to help us become better, help us train better, and help us be safe with firearms. And let's start with probably one of the most essential portions of the knowledge-based training with firearms, and that is the 4 weapon safety rules. So let's move on to that next. Okay, students, so the primary thing you had to do is done. You have finally acquired your firearm, whatever that firearm is, and you've decided to bring it home or bring it out to the range to practice with it. What are some things that we need to know? Well, first things first, and that's probably the most important thing, is safety. For all of my experienced firearm owners out there, this is going to be kind of redundant and repetitive information, stuff that you already know. But once again, this video is geared more towards individuals who have first purchased their firearm or are relatively new to guns in general. And there is no primary ring of safety than the 4 primary weapon safety rules. I'm going to speak on these. We'll go over each one in a little bit of detail, and then we'll move on. So what are the 4 primary weapon safety rules? Well, put quite simply, the 4 weapon safety rules are rules that were developed in order to create a ring of protection around a firearm so that way accidents don't happen. If these 4 rules are followed to the letter and to the T, and they are not broken or they are not bent in any way, a lot of the time you can end up completely mitigating the risk of firearms. Every single responsible gun owner and one that follows the law and treats their firearms like the tools that they are, that can be potentially dangerous, follow these rules. And if you are going to be a responsible firearm owner, you should follow these rules as well. They are paramount to maintaining safety for not only yourself, but other people when a firearm is around. Rule number 1, treat every weapon as if it's loaded. Rule number 2, never point your weapon at anything you do not intend to shoot. Rule number 3, keep your finger off the trigger unless you're prepared to fire. And the final one, rule number 4, keep the weapon unsafe until you intend to fire. Now there is a 5th rule. It's not necessarily a primary rule, but it is one that has come out nowadays with all the self-defense shootings that have occurred. It's one that we also learned in the military because of the nature of our job. And the 5th weapon safety rule is know your target and what's behind it. But the 4 primary ones that create a good bubble of safety around a firearm and the people that are using it are those first 4. So let's talk about them. Rule number 1, we treat every weapon as if it's loaded. That means whenever we are handling a firearm, we always treat it with the respect and the caution that it deserves. If these tools are handled irresponsibly, then bad things are going to happen. It's the same thing like if you drive your car irresponsibly. If you're driving down the highway going 120 miles an hour and you're swerving in and out of traffic, then bad things could potentially happen. The same exact thing can happen with a firearm. It also means that when we are handing the gun off to somebody or we're receiving a firearm from somebody else, we ask if it's loaded, and we also make sure that the handoff is done in a way that is as safe as possible. A very popular way to hand somebody off is the individual who has the firearm will safety check it first, and then they will do the handoff by grabbing the firearm, pointing it down, and then handing the magazine well out towards the individual who's receiving it. The reason this is done is because that makes the barrel point in a safe direction towards the floor, and you are not pointing the barrel at anybody's chest or pelvis region. You also show the person that there is no magazine inserted and that the weapon is unloaded. You can also do this with the slide lock to the rear. Never mishandle a firearm by taking it and throwing it around, obviously. Never treat it as if it's any other sort of tool, like a toy. It's not a toy. Treat it with the respect and the caution that it deserves, and the firearm is going to be just fine. Rule number 2, never point the weapon at anything that you do not intend to shoot. Firearms are very simple to understand. The dangerous end is this end right here. As long as that end is not pointed at a specific individual, the weapon is not going to hurt anybody. It goes without saying that the only time the weapon should be pointed at another person is if that person is a threat in some way. There are small caveats here and there for training purposes, like if you have a barrel blocking rod inside of the weapon, or if the weapon is a training weapon of some kind. But if it's a live fire weapon, 99.9% of the time, you do not point the barrel at anybody that you don't intend to fire upon. This helps ensure that if a negligent discharge occurs, the bullet is not going to strike an individual. Rule 3, keep your fingers straightened off the trigger until you're prepared to fire. Guns are machines. That means that unless they have a specific input put into them by a human being, they are not going to do what they are designed to do. I know kind of a funny meme for gun rights advocates is to take a firearm like this, go put it on their kitchen table, and then tell the gun, hey, go kill somebody right now, and the gun just sits there, obviously, because it's not a living thing, it's a machine. And while that may be funny, it's true. Unless a human being imposes their will and utilizes the weapon for a specific purpose, it's not going to sit there and it's not going to do anything. Mechanically speaking on the gun, the thing that's going to cause it to fire is the trigger right here. And unless you have a human being put their finger inside and physically pull it back, very, 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 very rarely do guns ever go off by themselves. I remember Mythbusters did an episode one time where they put a firearm inside of like an oven one time just to see that if it would fire on its own because of heat causing the primer on the bullet to fire automatically or something like that. And eventually it did, but it was a crazy number. It was upwards of like 500 degrees or something like that. I don't remember specifically exactly what the number was, but it was so high that the odds of it happening are pretty much non-existent. So when in doubt, when you have your hand on the gun, if you are freaked out and you don't want this thing to go off and you're totally scared, it's very easy. Keep your finger right here. As long as your finger's here and you're not putting input on the trigger, the gun's not going to go off. Rule number 4 can be kind of weird because some guns have safeties while other guns do not. Most of my guns do not have safeties, and that is a specific thing that I look for when I actually go and try and buy firearms. I do not like a whole lot of external safeties on the guns that I buy. This is something that you are going to have to think about when you are purchasing a firearm. A lot of self-defense enthusiasts often say that the number one safety on the gun that they have is this. As long as this does not touch the trigger, the gun is not going to go off, just like I talked about in rule number 3. But some people are a little bit more safety conscious, or they have children. They want to make sure that the gun has a mechanical function that allows it to remain safe even if somebody gets their hands on it. If you are a brand new firearm owner, I can kind of see this, but as someone who is seasoned with firearms and has trained with them often, I personally don't like a lot of safeties on my firearms, and I'll tell you why. For the same exact reason that I don't like complicated maneuvers in martial arts, I also don't like external safeties on firearms. And that's because if you think about it, when you draw your weapon, if you ever do have to draw your weapon in a self-defense situation, the amount of things that you're going to have to do to prepare the weapon to fire are now increased if you have an external safety. If a situation deteriorates, and it's going to deteriorate very, very quickly, and you end up having to draw your firearm and present it in order to shoot somebody, the last thing you want to be doing is fumbling with a safety. Or, God forbid, you are so adrenalized and you haven't trained a whole lot, so when you do draw and you point and the guy is coming at you and you pull the trigger is jammed up because the safety's on. Now you have to take that extra split second to thumb the safety off or do whatever you need to do in order to get the gun to fire. And if that happens, it might be too late by the time you thumb that safety off. When I was teaching down at Pacific West Academy as one of the advanced firearms instructors, we worked with Glocks down there, which don't have external safeties, but every now and then we had students come by with their own personal firearms, which we allowed them to bring, and some of them would have external safeties on them. This would work very well when we were line shooting at the range doing very, very basic drills, but later on when we started to make them do push-ups and burpees and started to sprint and started to have them do hand-to-hand combat before they went and they shot, their heart rate was increased, their stress was increased. What we ended up seeing is that when we had them draw and point, the students with the guns that had external safeties on them oftentimes totally forgot to thumb the safety off. And it's for that reason that I don't like having external safeties. Now, that does not mean that the gun does not have a safety system in it. I'm going to use my Smith & Wesson right here as an example. I don't know if you guys can see this, but the trigger right here is actually split up into two different sections. This is the upper trigger portion right here and the lower trigger portion right here. Now, if I put my finger on the upper trigger portion just like this and I try and pull the trigger back, it is not coming back at all. And the reason is because the trigger safety is designed so that way the bottom portion has to be depressed first, and once the bottom portion is depressed, now the entire trigger can move back. The reason that they have this is so that way you need to deliberately put your finger inside the entire trigger and use the entire meaty portion of your finger to put it on the trigger entirely and pull it back so that way the gun can fire. This helps prevent things like children with smaller hands and smaller fingers from pulling the trigger. It also helps ensure that sometimes if something gets caught inside the trigger there's less of a chance of the gun discharging. A lot of weapons that I have use those different types of safeties. As I mentioned before, I don't like a whole lot of safeties on my firearms for the reasons I mentioned, but that is something that you are going to have to think about when you are purchasing your firearm. If you do get an external safety on your gun, make sure that you constantly practice thumbing it off when you draw, when you're at the range and you're shooting. Because if you don't drill that, bad things can happen. I want to very briefly hit on the fifth rule, which is know your target and what's behind it. Now, this isn't necessarily geared towards beginner shooters and beginner individuals who are first purchasing a firearm, but it is relevant for people who want to learn self-defense. The reason we were trained that in the military and in law enforcement is because when you are engaging an individual, there is always the possibility that your shots are going to miss, and those shots always have an address. That's actually one of the things they told us. A bullet always has an address, meaning that every single bullet that comes out of your gun is going to go somewhere. And if you can't put your bullets on the target, meaning the enemy, those bullets could potentially travel a greater distance and hit somebody like an innocent civilian. It's for that purpose that you need to understand what you're shooting at first and foremost, make sure that it's a situation that condones a shooting, and then also understand what the surrounding area is like during the engagement so that way when you do shoot, the chances of you creating collateral damage are minimized. The only way you can really get good at this rule is via training a lot. If you guys want to see some advanced drills that you can practice on the range, I will do those in later videos, but for right now, let's keep it very basic. Okay guys, so now that we have hit on the 4 primary weapon safety rules, let's go over some nomenclature of the gun, and then what we're going to do is we're going to end this video because this is going to be part 1 in the classroom, and then when I go out to the range, we'll start class at part 2. I don't want to put the range portion into the classroom portion and combine them both together because this is a very expansive subject, and I want to make sure the video is not over an hour long. So let's hit on some nomenclature and then we'll call it a day. Okay guys, back at the black table again for the last portion of class today, and we have my Smith & Wesson M&P out here. I'm going to show the different nomenclature parts to it so that way you guys can better understand your firearms, and then we'll call it a day. Keep in mind that this firearm has already been safety checked, it is clear, and it is unloaded. It's totally safe. So let's go over the basic parts of the firearm here. Obviously, probably the most standout part that everyone thinks of is the trigger. The trigger is right here. Depressing the trigger is going to cause the firearm to discharge as long as the weapon is in condition 1. Condition 1 means that the weapon has a loaded magazine in the magazine well, and there is a round in the chamber. We will go over how to properly unload the weapon and go from a condition 3 to a condition 4 weapon and stuff like that later on at the range. Don't worry about that stuff right now. Next here, this little button right here is the magazine release. It's very obviously simple. You push this button and the magazine is going to pop out. Some weapons have spring-loaded magazine chambers where you push the button and it's going to force the magazine out, while other guns don't have that. All you need to know is you push this button, it's going to cause the magazine to pop out. Continuing on with magazines, this big giant hole right here where the magazine fits in is called the magazine well. Make sure that when you put the magazine in, you're actually putting in the right way. It's not going to fit inside if you try to put it in backwards. Moving on, you have your different types of sights. The rear portion right here is called your rear sight aperture, whereas your front portion right here is called your front sight post. We'll talk about how to properly utilize sights once again at the range. The barrel is this portion right here, whereas the muzzle is the portion in the very front where the bullet's actually going to come out. The upper receiver is this entire thing right here. It's also called the slide. And then the lower receiver is this plastic portion right down here. These two pieces are separated when you're cleaning the gun, and you need to make sure that you have all the parts for both your upper receiver and your lower receiver put back together properly. Otherwise, you can't put the gun back together and it's not going to function properly. Now, again, my gun doesn't have an external safety, but some guns do. I know on a very common gun like the Beretta 92F, there is a thumbable safety up here near the tang, the high portion of the tang right here. But on the Smith & Wesson M&P right here, it's a simple trigger safety like I showed before. Make sure that when you're looking at your firearm, you understand where the safety is. Up here, inside here, this is the chamber inside, and the portion where the ejected shell casings are going to be coming from is called the ejection port. Staying with the upper receiver portion here, this is called the slide lock. Right now, my slide is locked to the rear, so that way you guys can see that the weapon is in fact unloaded. But if I were to push the slide lock down, then the slide is going to chamber forward. In order for me to lock the slide back, I physically have to grab onto the slide here, pull it straight back, and then thumb the slide catch up. As you can see, there's a little divot right here on the upper receiver where as I push it up and I let the slide rack forward, it's going to catch the slide and it's going to make sure that it stays locked in the open position. When the weapon runs out of ammo and it runs dry, the slide is most of the time going to be locked to the rear. Now this firearm, along with a lot of modern firearms nowadays, have internal hammers, but if you guys remember on the earlier portion of this video when I was showing my Sig Sauer P232, it had an external hammer. If you have an external hammer, there is a separate portion called a decocker, which if you pull the hammer all the way back and you want to make sure that the hammer goes forward safely, then you hit the decocker, it brings the hammer forward without discharging the firearm. Back here on the handle, this portion is called the back strap. This thing right here is called the dovetail or the tang. You want to make sure that your grip is as high as possible. We'll go over that at the range. This portion right here, obviously, this is the grip. Grips can be interchangeable, so depending on your firearm. In this case, I have a lot of separate grips for this specific gun. I never change them out because it feels good in my hand already, but you can usually take grips off and interchange them with other grips. This thing right here surrounding the trigger is called the trigger guard. This ensures that nothing can accidentally hit the trigger and cause the gun to discharge. This right here is called a rail system. There's a bunch of different types of rail systems, but the most common is a Picatinny rail system. This allows you to attach, lasers, lights, whatever you want to attach to the underside of your firearm. Me personally, I'm not really big into that kind of stuff, but you have the option if you want it. This portion right here, this is what's called the takedown lever. This is how you disassemble the firearm. Now, just so you guys can see, I'll disassemble this firearm very quickly. Now, the method to disassemble the Smith & Wesson M&P is kind of a little bit weird, so just bear with me. You actually have this little thing at the bottom of the handle right here. You twist it, it comes out. It's this little rod thing, and what you have to do is you have to take the rod, pull it inside, and then pull this little thing down here. Can you see this? It's kind of hard to see, but there's this little thing right down here where you push it down. You saw that? Now what I can do is I can slide the takedown handle up. I can bring this forward, and now the upper and lower receiver are separated. The upper receiver, you don't really need to worry about disassembling. There's a lot of small parts in there. General cleaning on the weapon is going to be simple enough. But right here you have the spring. The spring can be pulled out, and then once you pull that out, you have the barrel right here. The weapon being disassembled like it's shown right here is generally how it's going to be when you're cleaning it. You really don't need to break it down any more than that. Reassembly is really easy. You just take the barrel, you put it back inside like so. You take the spring, you make sure that it's situated in the right area. You put it into this little divot on the barrel. I don't know if you can see that. It's very hard to see. Then once the spring has been properly replaced onto the barrel, you can see on the lower receiver right here, there are these metal tracks, and these line up with these metal indents right here. And what you're going to do is you're going to line those up. It's hard to see, but you're going to line those up. You're going to push it straight back. It should slide on very, very smoothly. Then what you're going to do is pull it straight back, engage the locking mechanism right here. Once it's locked, slide the takedown lever up, and now the weapon is reassembled. Function checking is very, very simple. All you do is keeping your fingers straightened off the trigger and pointing the weapon in a safe direction. You rack the slide multiple times just to ensure that the action still works. Another thing to remember, guys, is that not every weapon is going to be disassembled and reassembled the same exact way. Pistols in general do have a general design where there's going to be a takedown lever of some sort that's going to help disassemble the pistol. And when you reassemble them, they're all going to have essentially the same parts, similar parts anyway. But I mean, on the pistol here for my Smith & Wesson, that little weird thing right here, this little thing, let me see if I can show you again. This little weird thing that you pull down right here. I don't know if you can see it. I'll do it again. That little weird thing, that is unique to this gun, and I've never had it on any other pistol that I've reassembled or disassembled before. And so you have to make sure that you look at your owner's manual when you first buy a gun, because there might be little odd things like that, and you need to understand how to disassemble, reassemble, and clean your weapon properly, so that way no accidents occur, for one. Two, you don't reassemble it improperly. Next thing you know, you have a firearm that isn't built properly, you try and go shoot it and a catastrophic failure happens. And 3, we also need to know how to repair our weapon just in case. So understanding the in and outs of your firearms is extremely important if you're going to be a proper gun owner. Okay, students, so that is actually going to wrap it up for part 1, the classroom portion of the basic firearms training video. I hope you enjoyed what you learned today, and I hope it kind of dispelled some fear and some misunderstandings about firearms. Remember, firearms are simply tools. That is the way that they drilled it into us when we joined the military. The firearm is simply another piece of equipment. It is a tool along with many other tools that you have on your person, like simple things like your uniform, like your boots, like your flak jacket, like your Kevlar helmet. And as long as the tool is respected and treated properly, it's not going to harm anybody. There's no reason to fear it. I'm sure the first time you got into a car when you were first learning how to drive and you had no idea what you were doing, you were slightly apprehensive about it. But now, after years of drilling and training and driving over and over and over again, you get into a car with no fear whatsoever. It's become an everyday thing. Getting into your car, going to work, there's nothing to be scared of. I think you'll find the same exact thing is going to happen when it comes to firearms. After you purchase your first gun and you get over the initial fear of this inanimate object, you bring it to the range, you practice with it, you drill with it, it's going to become just another piece of equipment. And while we don't want to treat it like a toy, we are going to become more comfortable with it, and I hope that happens with you. So the next portion of the class is for you guys to join me out on the range. We're going to be going over a lot of very, very important stuff. We're going to be going over the actual physical drills and the things that you need to practice physically with a firearm in order to get proficient with them. Things like drawing from concealed and drawing from open carry, proper grip placement, proper sight alignment and sight picture, proper trigger control, proper breath control, proper follow through. And then we're also going to be doing a bunch of different drills, magazine swap drills, firing drills like a double tap, controlled pair, failure to stop drill like I mentioned before, and they're just going to be very basic drills, nothing super John Wicky or super fancy, but again, remember, it's the fundamentals of shooting, just like the fundamentals of fighting, that are going to be the most important stuff and the most effective stuff that we use in a real-life combative scenario. So with that being said, class is not dismissed. You're going to come with me out on the range in the next video, and that's where the second portion of this class will be occurring. If you like the video and you like what you saw and you like what you heard, well, you know what to click and you know what to do. I will see you guys at the range. Can't wait for you to join me there. And remember, until that time, victory loves preparation. So stay prepared, stay trained, stay healthy and fit, and be safe. See you guys at the range. Have a good one.